Long ago, nestled between high misty mountains and shimmering rivers, lay an ancient woodland called the Enchanted Forest. Locals whispered of its magic, of trees that whispered to one another, flowers that glowed at dusk, and animals that walked as if they knew secrets older than time. Few dared to enter the forest, not because of danger, but because of a reverent fear of feeling that they were stepping onto sacred ground. It was said that those who entered the Enchanted Forest left, changed, or never returned at all. But stories varied, and no one truly knew what lay beyond the emerald wall of trees. One such story, passed from generation to generation, told of a silent deer who guarded the heart of the forest. The deer never made a sound, not a cry, nor a footstep. It had eyes that shimmered like the night sky and antlers like branches tipped in silver light. They said it appeared only to those who needed to find something, though no one ever knew what that something was until it revealed itself. It was this very tale that drew young Elira into the forest. Elira was a curious girl, barely 16, who had grown up in the nearby village of Loria. Her mother had fallen ill with a sickness no healer could name. Desperate to save her, Elira remembered the old stories and decided to seek the silent deer, hoping the forest's magic might offer a cure. She entered the forest one pale morning, dressed in a threadbare cloak and armed with only a satchel of herbs and a small wooden flute her mother had carved. As soon as she crossed the tree line, the world changed. The air grew thicker, laced with the scent of jasmine and damp moss. Birdsong quieted, replaced by the rhythmic hum of unseen insects and the occasional rustle of unseen leaves. 4 hours Elira walked, deeper and deeper, until she reached a grove where time seemed to hold its breath. The trees here were ancient and gnarled, their branches weaving a canopy so dense that the light broke through in spears. In the center of the grove stood a great stone, covered in moss, shaped like an open hand. Elira sat upon the stone, exhausted and unsure what to do next. She reached for her flute and began to play a soft, trembling tune, one her mother used to hum at night. The music, though simple, seemed to ripple through the forest like a breeze through silk. Then, without warning, he appeared. The silent deer stepped into the clearing, tall and ghost-like. Its coat was silver gray, its eyes pools of starlight. Elira gasped, but it made no sound. Dongli met her gaze and stood still, as if waiting. Heart pounding, Elira stood. "Please," she whispered. "My mother is dying. I've come to find help. Magic. A cure. Something." The deer tilted its head, then turned and began to walk into the forest, slow and deliberate. Elira followed. The path the deer took was not one of dirt or trail, but of shifting light. Flowers bloomed and wilted behind them, and trees bent slightly as if bowing to the creature's presence. They crossed a stream that sparkled with colors Elira had no name for, past a sleeping bear with ivy in its fur, and walked through a curtain of glowing vines into a place unlike any other. It was a glade, lit not by sun or moon, but by the forest itself, by luminescent plants, cast gentle hues of blue and green. And in the center stood a tree with bark like glass and leaves of firelight. Beneath it, nestled in its roots, lay a shallow pool filled with silver water. The deer stopped and turned to Elira, its gaze urging. Elira knelt beside the pool. "Is this what I need?" she asked softly. The deer did not answer, but the water began to ripple. Images rose to the surface, memories of her mother's laughter, her hands weaving, her eyes glowing with pride, and then a final image. Her mother lying still, a soft smile on her lips. Tears welled in Elira's eyes. "She's going to die, isn't she?" The deer lowered its head, not in confirmation, but in compassion. Elira looked again at the water. "Then let me take something back. Something to ease her pain, to let her go in peace." She dipped her hands into the water, which felt neither cold nor wet, but warm and electric, like light in liquid form. She filled a small flask from her satchel, and the water shimmered inside, like captured moonlight. When she looked up, the deer was gone. The journey back felt shorter, Though Elira could not recall the steps, by dusk, she emerged from the forest's edge, her flask safe in her hand. She returned home to find her mother sleeping, breathing shallowly. Gently, she pressed a few drops of the enchanted water to her mother's lips. The woman stirred, opened her eyes, and for a brief moment, her face lit with clarity and peace. "My star," she whispered, using her childhood name for Elira. "You found it." Elira smiled through tears and held her mother's hand until the final breath passed between them like a soft wind. The villagers never asked how she'd done it. They saw the peace in her mother's face and the quiet strength in Elira's eyes, and they understood without words. Years passed, and Elira grew into a wise woman. Some said a healer, others said a witch. She never confirmed nor denied the rumors, but when the desperate came to her, she listened. Sometimes she would send them away with herbs, sometimes with stories, and sometimes, if she saw the forest calling in their eyes, she would nod toward the trees and say, "There's an old path, not far from here. If you find a stone shaped like a hand, sit and play." Something true. And though few ever saw the silent deer, the enchanted forest listened still. The seasons turned as they always did: spring, painting the meadows with color, summer warming the rivers, autumn cloaking the hills in fire, and winter silencing the world in white. Through them all, Elira remained, her cottage standing at the forest's edge, watching. Though she no longer sought the silent deer, she felt its presence from time to time: a stillness in the trees, a flicker in the corner of her eye, a dream where hooves stirred silver mist. The forest had marked her, gently but permanently. One night, as the first frost kissed the ground, there came a knock on her door. A boy, no older than 10, stood shivering on her porch, clutching a blanket. Behind him, the dark of night, and deeper still the silhouette of the forest. "My sister," he choked. "She's lost inside." Elira moved quickly. She wrapped him in warmth, gave him tea laced with herbs to steady his breath, and asked only what she needed. His name was Bren, and his sister Lysa, older by 2 years, had wandered into the forest at dusk. They'd argued nothing serious, and when he turned around, she was gone. He'd waited, called for her, then ran to Elira, knowing the forest better than to follow. "Elira," he asked, voice thin, "will she come back?" Elira looked toward the trees, listening. The wind stirred, but gave no answer. "Not yet. I'll go," she said. Bren's eyes widened. "But it's dark." That's when the forest speaks loudest. With only her cloak, staff, and a satchel of protective charms, Elira entered once more into the enchanted forest. The cold air seemed to part for her, the frost melting from the leaves. As she passed, she moved quickly, not blindly, her feet tracing half-remembered paths from long ago. Then she stopped. There, lying in a clearing, was Lysa. She wasn't hurt, but she looked different, pale, as though a dream had pulled her under. Vines curled gently around her fingers, and her lips moved soundlessly. "Elira," she whispered, not seeing her. "I saw it. The deer." Elira knelt beside her and pressed a warm hand to her cheek. "You're safe now." "But I don't want to leave," Lysa said softly, eyes unfocused. "It showed me things I've never told anyone." A gust of wind passed overhead, and leaves rustled with a sigh. Elira looked up, and there it stood again, the silent deer. This time, its antlers shimmered not with silver, but golden light. It looked between them, and Elira understood. "She's not lost," Elira said aloud. "She was chosen." The deer nodded. "What do you mean?" Lysa asked, sitting up. Her eyes were clearing, but her heart still lingered in whatever dream had held her. Elira helped her to her feet. "The forest only calls when it has something to give or something to ask." "I heard voices," Lysa said. "Memories that weren't mine. I saw a battle, people running, a tree struck by lightning. I don't understand." Elira took a slow breath. "You're not the first to be shown visions. The forest holds time differently. Past, futurates, all wound into its roots. It may have chosen you to remember something, or to prevent something. The deer stepped forward, and for the first time, Elira reached out and touched its muzzle, warm, real, alive. It lingered a moment, then turned and disappeared like mist before the morning. Elira and Lysa walked back in silence, their footsteps leaving no prints. In the months that followed, Elira took Lysa as her apprentice. The girl learned quickly not only of herbs and healing, but of the subtle language of trees, of listening without ears, and of silence that spoke louder than words. Lysa told no one of what she saw, but sometimes her drawings would reveal fragments, forests burning, people weeping under two moons, and always the silent deer watching. Then, one evening, a terrible storm came, black clouds rolling over the mountains, lightning streaking the sky like torn parchment. Elira watched from the doorway of her cottage. "Is it coming?" Lysa asked. Elira nodded. "But not just a storm," she said. "Something else rides it." That night, the forest cried out. Trees fell. Fires bloomed. Creatures fled. And Elira knew the forest's balance had broken. She and Lysa ran into the heart of it, guided by instinct more than vision. They found the great tree, the one that had once held the silver pool, split in two by a bolt of lightning. Around it, the ground had ruptured, and from the cracks, a darkness spilled like ink. A voice, ancient and bitter, echoed through the clearing. They broke the pact. Elira turned. "Who speaks?" The silent deer emerged, but it was no longer alone. Behind it came others, creatures she had only heard of in stories. A fox with 9 tails, a serpent with wings of ash, a raven crowned in stars. The deer stepped forward. "The forest remembers," Elira said, understanding dawning. "But now it needs guardians." The deer touched its antlers to Lysa's brow. A circle of light blossomed there, then faded. "Will she be safe?" Elira asked. The deer gazed at her for a long moment, then bowed. Lysa stood straighter now. The visions were warnings. This was always coming. Elira felt pride and sorrow twist within her. "Then you are ready." And in that clearing, amidst fire and wind, the pact was renewed. Lysa would remain not just as Elira's apprentice, but as something more, a bridge between the human world and the enchanted one. A seer, a keeper. Years passed. Elira grew older, and eventually, the forest called her for the final time. Her body was never found. But villagers say, her laughter still dances on the wind. Lysa remains. Still young, still listening. Children now tell stories of the girl who speaks to trees, who walks with deer, and who watches over the woods with starlit eyes. The enchanted forest endures, and the silent deer still walks within it, waiting, watching, whispering. The enchanted forest had always been a place of balance, of silence and song, light and shadow. But something had changed. Lysa felt it each morning she woke, a weight pressing just behind her thoughts, like thunder hiding behind a distant hill. The dreams grew darker now. Where once she saw symbols and voices in the trees, now she saw visions of decay roots rotting, the river running black, the stars going out one by one. One morning, after waking from a dream of falling sky, she stood at the edge of the glade where Elira once touched the silent deer. "Show me," she whispered. "I'm ready." The wind stirred, and out of the mist stepped a deer butt. It was not alone. The creatures that had once stood behind it, mythic guardians of the forest, deeper magic now limped and bled shadows. A raven with missing feathers, a serpent coiled around a dying branch, and the deer itself, its antlers dimmed, the shimmer gone from its coat. Lysa's heart clenched. "What's happening to you?" The deer stepped aside. Behind it, from the trees, came a man. No, not a man. He wore the shape of one tall, dark-cloaked, with eyes like cobalt. He carried with him the feeling of rot, of iron, of a world that had long rejected the forest's law. "Hello, Chow," he said, voice like cracking bark. "The last guardian, I presume." Lysa stepped back. Who are you? I am what your kind made me, a shadow cast by broken promises. I was once a seed in the soil, forgotten. Now I am the rot in your roots. Lysa remembered Alira's words. The forest holds time differently. Past, future it's, all wound into its roots. You're the price, she whispered. The debt no one paid. He smiled with no warmth. The forest gave for centuries. Gave and gave. Magic, healing, dreams. But your world took until there was nothing left but me. He lifted a hand, and vines shriveled at his feet. The serpent writhed. The raven cawed once, then vanished. The silent deer stepped between them. But the shadow man only bowed. Even your ancient protectors cannot stop what is already within you. And with that, he vanished, leaving the glade colder than winter. The forest began to change. Where once the trees whispered secrets, now they groaned in pain. The silver stream turned cloudy. The animals grew thin. Villagers stopped coming, afraid even to speak of what they saw in the mists. Lysa worked tirelessly. She lit fires of sage and moonbark, summoned old spirits with chants Alira had taught her, and walked the dream paths each night seeking answers. One night, deep in meditation, she found herself in the memory of the forest itself, older than any map, older than Alira. She stood in a vast hall of trees whose branches touched the stars. At the center, a throne made of twisted roots. Upon it, a woman cloaked in green fire. You are the one, said the woman, the one who listens. Lysa knelt. Then help me. The shadow grows stronger every day. The woman rose. It is not a shadow born of evil, but of hunger. Magic given without wisdom. A pact kept with words, but broken in hearts. Lysa remembered the villagers who feared the forest but forgot to love it, who took its medicines but cursed its silence. The forest needs more than a guardian, Lysa said aloud. It needs a voice. The woman smiled, then speak. The next day, Lysa did what no guardian before her had dared. She left the forest. She walked into the village, cloaked in vines and light, her eyes glowing like the dusk. The people gasped. Some bowed, others hid. But she did not stop. She walked to the center square and called out, "Come." One by one, they did, curious, fearful, remembering stories of Alira, of the silent deer, of a forest that once gave without asking. Lysa raised her voice. For too long, we've asked and never given. For too long, we've taken the magic of the forest and feared the cost. The cost is here now. The forest is dying. And if it dies, so do we. Silence fell over the village. Then an old man stepped forward. He had once been a hunter, now blind, but he bowed his head. What can we do? Lysa smiled for the first time in weeks. Listen. That night, the villagers lit lanterns and followed her into the forest. Together, they sang old songs, forgotten lullabies, harvest chants, the hymn of Alira's flute, played again by trembling fingers. They planted seeds along the blackened stream. They buried offerings of herbs, tools, and promises. They told the forest they remembered, and it listened. The next morning, the first silver flower bloomed again. The shadow man did not disappear, but he faded, retreating deeper, slower. The rot receded. The deer's coat regained its shimmer. The pact, once broken, began to heal, not by magic alone, but by memory, gratitude, and return. Lysa remained, of course. But now she was not alone. Others came, children with dreams, elders with stories, healers with hope. They called themselves keepers of the pact, and the forest sang once more. Years passed. The forest healed, though it bore scars, branches twisted by fire. Clearings now quiet, old spirits slow to return. But it lived. That alone was enough. Lysa stood taller now. The girl who had once trembled beneath the stars was now a woman wrapped in quiet power. Her eyes, once filled with questions, now held answers. But even she knew her journey was not the end of the story. Others had begun to follow her path. There was Sarah, a mute girl who painted with ash and gold and whose brushstrokes whispered the language of the trees. There was old Brel, the village blacksmith, who laid down his hammer to plant moonseed around the dying groves. And there was Kalana Boyd, born with dreams, not his own visions of a forest yet to come. They became her students, not apprentices, but voices. The keepers of the pact grew, no longer a hidden order. They moved between forest and village like threads binding a single tapestry. They taught that the forest was not something to be feared, but remembered. Not owned, but honored. Once a season, they held a night of remembrance, a time when and forest folk gathered by the silver stream, now clear again, to sing, tell stories, and speak the names of the forgotten. Lanterns floated through the trees, carrying promises and forgiveness. On one such night, Lysa stood by the pool beneath the glass-bark tree, now regrown with glowing leaves. Her hands rested on its roots, and she closed her eyes. "Alira," she whispered, "you should see this." And for a moment, just a moment, she felt a warm wind circle her, like an embrace. The scent of sage, the sound of a flute. But peace never lingers forever. One winter, scouts from a distant kingdom arrived. They came not with weapons, but with scrolls and scales, their minds set on mapping what they called unclaimed territory. "This forest holds resources," their leader declared. "Rare herbs, metals beneath the roots, power. We've only begun to understand." Lysa stood before them, calm and clear. "It is not unclaimed," she said. "It is alive." The emissaries smirked. "Then let it speak for itself." And it did. That night, the winds rose, howling with old tongues. Trees shifted. The animals vanished. The emissaries vanished to no blood, no scream, only silence. The forest had spoken. Word spread. The kingdom never returned. The forest boundaries, once feared, were now respected, not by law, but by legend. Lysa aged slowly. The forest gave her many gifts, but not immortality. She bore the years with grace, her hair turning silver, her voice softer but never weaker. In time, her students became teachers. The keepers spread to other forest quiet ones, wounded ones, forgotten ones. Across the land, people began listening again. On her final day, Lysa returned to the grove where she had first seen the silent deer. It was waiting. Its coat gleamed like starlight, untouched by time. Around it, the other guardians had returned healed and whole. "You came," Lysa whispered, kneeling. The deer stepped forward and bowed. "I'm ready," she said. It lowered its head, touching her brow with its antlers. Light bloomed around her, warm and golden. And then, silence. She did not die. She became something else. Where she had stood, a tree now grew, not tall, but wide, with leaves of silver and gold, and a trunk that hummed like distant song. They called it the Whispering Tree. And beneath its boughs, the silent deer could always be found. Epilogue. When the forest calls, children still speak of the forest with awe. They walk its edges with care, singing lullabies Lysa once taught. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, they see hoofprints that lead nowhere, or flowers that bloom in a perfect circle overnight. And sometimes, just sometimes, a child who feels lost, or hurt, or afraid, finds themselves drawn to a quiet clearing with a stone shaped like a hand. If they sit, if they are still, if they are true, a deer with eyes like the night sky might step from the shadows, silent, watching, waiting. And so, the forest remembers. The Whispering Tree stood at the center of the glade, its leaves shifting colors with the season's silver in winter, gold in summer, a soft rose in the spring. It was said that if you placed your ear against its bark, you could hear stories spoken in Lysa's voice. Generations passed, and the forest lived on, but the world outside continued to change. Cities rose far beyond the mountains. The old kingdoms crumbled and reformed. Maps were redrawn. Fewer and fewer people remembered the songs of the forest, or the silver-eyed deer who once stood watch. But the keepers of the pact remembered. They had changed to no longer just a circle of healers and dreamers. Now they were teachers, travelers, and they walked the line between nature and progress, reminding the world that one could build without breaking, harvest without harm, speak without silencing. Among them was a girl named Marin. Marin was not born in the forest. She came from a city of glass towers and iron roads. Her parents, traders and skeptics, sent her to visit the forest as a punishment for misbehavior. She was headstrong, impatient, a child of humming wires and blinking screens. She did not believe in magic until the first night she dreamed beneath the forest's canopy. She dreamed of a stag with antlers, like branches and eyes that held storms. She dreamed of a tree that whispered her name. She dreamed of a girl with silver hair, standing beside a glowing pool, holding out a hand. When she woke, her pillow was damp with dew, and her shoes were full of flower petals. She told no one. But she returned to the glade again, and again, and again. Each time, the forest gave her something small, a feather that didn't fall, a squirrel that danced in her path, a soft hum in the roots when she knelt to listen. On the 7th visit, she met Island, the current keeper of the glade, and Lysa's great-grand student. Island said nothing at first, simply handed Marin a seed and a small book of songs. "Plant this where it feels quietest," they said, "and don't sing until you've forgotten what your voice sounds like." Marin frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," Island replied, and walked away. Weeks passed. Marin did as instructed. She wandered deep into the woods, listening not with her ears, but with her skin. She stopped checking her She stopped needing answers. And one day, beneath a crumbling arch of vine and stone, she planted the seed. She sat, and she waited, not a sound in her throat. When at last she sang after silence had remade her voice into something honest, as seed blossomed into a flower, with petals shaped like deer's ears. The forest had accepted her. She was one of them now. Marin trained under Island. She learned the history of the forest, the story of Alira, of Lysa, of the pack. She learned to read when the way others read books. She learned to follow hoofprints no one else could see. But more than that, she brought something new. She brought stories from the city, songs made of metal and memory, drawings that glowed, tools that hummed without fire. And the forest old, but never where Lysa had rebuilt the bridge between forest and people, Marin began building a bridge between old magic and new understanding. Soon, the glade no longer held just whispered leaves. It hummed with quiet music, spun from vines and wire. Forest spirits danced to rhythms made of both wood and steel. The silent deer came again. This time, it bowed, not in warning, but in welcome. Epilogue. A new pact. The keepers gathered beneath the stars. Children of the forest, children of cities, dreamers, builders, all swore not to control, but to collaborate. They stood around the whispering tree as Marin read aloud the new pact written in ink and light, sealed in song and silence. We remember what was broken. We honor what is healed. We promise not to forget again. Above them, stars pulsed gently, and from deep within the forest, a low, echoing call rang out, not warning, not fear, but joy. The silent deer walked the glade once more, no longer alone. Behind it came others, young and bright, glowing with dawn light. The forest had spoken again, and this time, the world would listen. It began, as many things do in the forest, with a change so small no one noticed at first. The whispering trees' leaves, once shifting softly between seasons, stopped their dance. The silver in their tips told. Birds that once nested in its branches circled the glade and chose not to land. Marin felt it before she saw it. A pull behind her eyes, like a song with the final note missing. A hush that wasn't peace but absence. She pressed her ear to the tree. Nothing. Not even Lysa's voice. That night, Marin returned to the glade with Island. Together they gathered the other keepers, those who walked both city and forest, dream and waking. They lit lanterns and circled the tree. Marin led the old songs, the ones that stirred the oldest roots. But the silence remained. "The whispering tree is not dead," Highland said, kneeling beside it. "But something deeper has gone quiet." Moran nodded. "The song has stopped. Elsewhere, across the outer groves and forgotten hollows, the forest began to dream too deeply. Animals wandered in waking trances. Rivers lost their current. Even time itself seemed to slow, days fading into one another like blurred pages. And then came the visions. Keepers began to dream not of deer or trees or stars, but of a single note, a tone that trembled the bones, a hum that vibrated their teeth, yet left no echo. The dreams always ended the same way. The silent deer standing at the edge of a cliff beneath a black sky, its antlers shattered. Marin woke each time with tears on her face and silence in her ears. Island brought her a legend, one from before even Alira's time. Before the deer, there was the first song. It was not sung, but lived when the world was young. The song carried the stars into the sky. The forest remembered it. Until we forgot how to listen. What if the forest is forgetting too? Marin asked. No, Island said. It's not forgetting. It's warning. To find the source of the fading, Marin had to walk the path of the first songer route. No one had dared for centuries. It led beneath the earth, through roots and time, where sound becomes memory and silence becomes shape. Before she descended, the silent deer came to her. Its eyes no longer glowed, but were dark, endless, as if it had looked too long into something beyond understanding. Still, it bowed its head, and Marin sang to it not in words, but in feeling, the song of her childhood, of steel towers and lonely mornings, of learning how to listen again, of finding belonging in the hush of trees. The deer touched her chest with its antlers, and Marin began to glow. The path was a tunnel of music and memory. She walked 4 days through dreams and stories, Era dancing in moonlight, Lysa whispering to the roots, a million nameless children laughing in the glades. And then, silence. Not emptiness. The beginning, a single pulse. The first song? She knelt, placing her hand on the earth. And she did not sing. She listened, not to sound, but to the pulse of life before language. She let herself be, unmade, no names, no roles, only rhythm, a heartbeat beneath all things. And the song returned, not in thunder, but in the crack of a seed breaking open, in a tear slipping down a cheek, in the breath before a baby's cry. She carried it back up the tunnel, rising into the forest, not with power, but with presence. When Marin returned, the whispering tree was in bloom again. Its leaves shimmered like rain on fire. And for the first time in centuries, the forest sang aloud, not through whispers, but through all its voices: bird, beast, wind, root, river, even the silent deer. Especially the deer. Its antlers, once broken in dreams, now held light, not just of stars but of understanding. Final words. The song lives on in the years that followed. The song was woven into everything the keepers did. Children were taught not to speak over the wind, but with it. Villagers began planting listening stones in their gardens, carved with the words, "Speak only after hearing." And each year, on the night the whispering tree glowed brightest, the forest echoed with a great gathering of voices old and young, human and spirit, singing together, not just remembering the pact, but renewing it. And deep within the heart of the forest, the deer watched not as a guardian, but as a friend. Its silence, no longer a mystery, but a space in which all songs begin. The world was listening again, and yet the forest stirred with a strange new restlessness. The keepers noticed it first. Birds migrating in spirals, not lines. Trees budding out of season, shadows that moved against the sun, not signs of sickness but of awakening. One evening, Marine climbed the tallest canopy in the western glade and looked out beyond the forest's familiar edge. In the far distance, where maps said only desert and rock remained, she saw green, a deep, rippling green like the shimmer of waves in the moonlight. But no forest had stood there in centuries. She consulted the oldest map scrolls. The parchment crumbled, but one name remained. Aesloran, the forest that was lost, burned in the age of Iron Kings, plundered for flamewood, turned to ash and dust generations before Lysa was born. But now it was waking and calling. Maren heard it first in her dreams, a humming to ancient forest song, too deep for wind. It vibrated in her bones. The silent deer stood watch by the whispering tree, unmoving, as though waiting for a signal only it could understand. Then, at the peak of a blood moon, the deer stepped forward. It crossed the glade and stopped before Maren. Its eyes no longer glowed white. They were green. Maren knew what it meant. The forest was no longer calling her to protect it, but it was calling her to follow it. The journey into the lost. Maren gathered a small circle island, now gray-haired and still sharp. Solin, a city-born whisperer of flame. Naya, who could speak to wolves in riddles. And Torrent, whose silence was truer than most songs. They crossed into the edge of the world, where once only sand stretched, roots now writhed. Just beneath the surface, new trees rose, crooked and strange, bark as black as coal, leaves that shimmered like tears. Creatures moved in the underbrush, new but familiar, echoes of the forest they left behind, shaped by fire and forgotten soil. They were not welcome, not at first. The forest that was lost remembered betrayal. It remembered axes and poison and silence. It tested the keepers. Storms came without clouds. Voices whispered through thorns. One night, Maren found herself face to face with a creature that wore her father's voice, asking her why she ever left home. Still, they walked. Still, they listened. Still, they sang not to soothe, but to offer truth. "We are not your past," Maren whispered to the air. "We are your future." And slowly, the lost forest listened. They found the heart of Aes. It was not a tree. It was a hollow, a crater ringed with twisted roots, where a single stone sat glowing green, pulsing slow. The stone of memory. Torrent stepped forward and touched it. His silence became sound, not words, but a deep, drumming beat that all of them felt in their chest. The stone was singing, but the song was broken, fractured, interrupted by centuries of loss. To heal it, the keepers would need to offer more than presence. They would need to offer story. Each of them stepped forward, placing a hand on the stone, offering a memory. Island Lysis, final breath, beneath the whispering tree, a wolf cub cradled in her arms, as fire devoured the southern glade. Solin, the day she turned flame into music, and the forest forgave her. And Maren, she offered no memory. She offered a promise. "You are not forgotten. You are not finished. We walk with you now." The stone of memory cracked, but not in destruction. It opened, and light poured out, not harsh, not blinding, but soft, endless, green. From every root and shadow, the forest sang again. Aeslan was not lost. It was becoming epilogue. The green horizon years passed. The keepers did not return home. They stayed to help the lost forest shape itself anew. Children were born under new trees. Songs were written in a blend of old languages and new winds. Even the cities began to listen once more, as vines crept gently into stone and left blossoms instead of ruin. The silent deer was seen less often now. It had other forests to wake, other songs to start. But sometimes, in the greenest twilight, children of both forest and city alike swear they see a silver shimmer on the horizon, watching, waiting, not as a warning, but as a welcome. After the rebirth of Aesloran, a hush settled across the lands, but not a silence of emptiness. It was the quiet before a turning, the pause between heartbeats. When the world shifts its rhythm, the forest, it seemed, was not alone in its awakening. Dreams began to cross borders. In distant lands, where no tree had grown for generations, saplings burst from stone. Songs, once bound to specific groves, or whispered in the ancient wood, were now heard in the hum of desert winds. echoed in caverns where no human voice had ever entered. The wild realms were stirring. Marin and the other keepers named this new phenomena the second rooting, not a return, but an expansion. What was once a single forest singing in secret, guarded by deer and pactuas, now a network of waking consciousness. Forests speaking to deserts, rivers remembering mountains, creatures once extinct returning as dream shadows first, then flesh. The land was alive again, but not everyone welcomed it. The fracture born of fear. In the city of Velmark, scholars and engineers had long claimed that the age of nature was over. They believed in the supremacy of glass, steel, and flame. When green tendrils began to split their pavement and birds nested in clock towers, they called it a threat. The Council of Design issued a decree. Root must not replace reason, and so they began to build a wall not of stone, but of sound, a humming, keening frequency designed to keep the forest out. It worked. For a time. In Velmark no leaf dared unfurl. No bird sang. Children began to lose their dreams. The deer would not enter. But Marin did, disguised in the robes of a scholar. She walked the polished streets and listened to the hum. It was not merely mechanical. It was grief-engineered into structure, echoing the loss of something forgotten. She found it beneath the archive hall. A root, fossilized and locked in glass, pulsing faintly. She pressed her hand to it and sang not with her voice, but with her memory. The glass cracked, then shattered. Dreams returned that night, not peaceful ones but on us. Elders dreamed of the forests they had once fled. Children dreamed of deer made of wind and stars. Machines whispered riddles in their sleep. The wall of sound fell, not with force but with forgiveness. The song of the realms in the seasons that followed. Marin and the keepers traveled far beyond their old borders. They built bridges not of wood or stone, but of story and trust. In the sunken city of Tarith, gardens bloomed in salt. In the fire canyons of rural moss climbed glowing rocks. Even in the endless northern snows, pine and aurora grew side by side. And always, in the distance, where shadow met horizon, walked the silent deer. But now, it was never truly alone. Other deer followed. Some with antlers, like crystal. Some with coats like ink. Some no bigger than rabbits. They were the spirits of new realms, called forth, not by fear, but by invitation. The pact renewed. A final gathering was held beneath a sky lit, not by stars, but by floating seeds of every forest. Old and new. Elders came. Children danced. Spirits hovered just at the edge of vision. Even cities sent delegates, and Marin, no longer just a keeper, but a weaver of realms, stood beneath the glowing whispering tree, its roots now stretching into every known land, and spoke the new pact. Where once we walked in fear, now we walk in trust. Where once we silenced the wild, now we listen. Where once the forest stood alone, now the realms rise together, not as master and servant, but as kin. The whispering tree shed a single leaf, gold-edged with green. It drifted into Marin's hands, and in that moment, she understood. The pact would never be finished, because it was alive, because it was the forest. Epilogue. When you listen closely, they say the realms are still expanding. In the deepest oceans, kelp forests whisper in languages no one has yet translated. In the air above the tallest spires, clouds gather in shapes of antlers and wings. And in places untouched by time, a child might step into a ring of stones, feel a pull in their chest, and hear a voice soft, certain, and familiar. A voice like the forest itself, saying, "Sing, and I will answer." It began with a streak of silver fire across the night sky. The people of the wild realms watched as a star fell, not fading, but pulsing, spiraling, resisting the silence that consumes most things in descent. It didn't crash with thunder, but with a single, crystalline tone that resonated for days through mountain, river, and root. Marin felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat. Island, older, now, and bound to the grove of songs, sent word. The sky has answered. But not all answers are gifts. The keepers gathered once more those who still walked between realm and root, dream and waking, and followed the pulse to where the star had landed. They expected fire, ruin, perhaps even revelation. What they found was a tree. It was unlike any other tree known to the realms. Its bark shimmered like obsidian wrapped in moonlight. Its branches bore no leaves, only translucent orbs that reflected memories not the viewer's own, but strangers' lives, alien landscapes, impossible creatures. Its roots didn't burrow into the earth. They drifted slightly above it, pulsing softly, defying gravity. This was not a tree of this world. This was a starseed, and it had not fallen. It had come seeking the memory within. When Marin placed her hand on the trunk, visions struck her instantly. A dying world where forests had turned to glass. A realm where stars whispered names and trees grew upside down from a final grove, hidden in a void, where creatures of silence had built a sanctuary of echoes, and then emptiness. A long, yawning silence. The starseed was alone. It was the last forest of its kind, and it had crossed realms to survive. The keepers were divided. Some believed the starseed was a miracle meant to be nurtured and joined to the new wild realms. Others, like Turan, feared its silence. What if its world died, not of time, he said, but of betrayal? What if silence follows it? But Marin saw something else. The starseed wasn't just seeking survival. It was seeking remembrance, and so she offered it. What it lacked, the joining song at the heart of the whispering tree. Marin sang alone. No words, no rhythm, only feeling. She poured into it every story. They had woven of forests, reborn, cities healed, children taught to listen. She sang the weight of loss, the strength of trust, and the echo of the deer's gaze in twilight. The whispering tree listened, and responded not with leaves, but with light. It sent a single root, a thread of golden memory across the realms, through dream and distance, to the starseed. And the starseed answered. That night, the sky changed. The constellations shifted slightly, not broken, rewritten. Where once there had been a blank space feared, new constellation bloomed. The hollow star, no longer hollow, now filled with story. The return of the silent deer. The deer came again, not walking, but appearing in the clearing where the starseed had rooted. It stood silently before the new tree, and the tree bent slightly toward it, not in submission, but in recognition. The deer, once the guardian of a single forest, now bowed before something older, stranger and somehow stilken. Then it turned to Marin. For the first time, she heard it speak, not aloud, but within her mind. You listened. You learned. Now, you must teach what cannot be spoken. Epilogue. The forever grove years passed, and still, the wild realms grew. But now, within the circle of keepers, a new tradition began. Each year, one child, from each realm, forest, city, desert, sky was chosen. They walked together to the hollow star tree. They placed their hands on the trunk and shared a memory, not just their own, but one they carried from another. A borrowed joy, a witnessed sorrow, a tale passed down. The starseed shimmered, accepted it, and wove it into the orbs on its branches. Now, when a traveler stood before the hollow star tree, they didn't just see distant worlds. They saw themselves reflected through the eyes of others. And that, Marin knew, was the final purpose of the pact. Not just to remember the forest, but to remember each other. Long before the whispering tree ever routed, before the first deer stepped silent between the trees, before humans learned to sing to the wind, ... There was a forest, the first, not bound by world or season, not tied to time. It was the beginning of story itself. The songs sung there wove stars into the sky. Its leaves shaped the dreams of unborn creatures. It was not known, only felt a presence deeper than thought, softer than shadow, older than anything alive. And one day, it vanished. Not in fire, not in silence, but in sacrifice. The first forest offered itself to become possibility. It broke its roots into shards and scattered them across the cosmos, each shard carrying the memory of what had once been. A longing to be heard, a hunger to be known, a love of becoming. The whispering tree was one of those shards. The hollow star tree, another. The silent deer, it was not a guardian. It was a messenger. The final song, Maren had grown older. Not frail, but rooted in her own way. She no longer walked the realms. She didn't need to. The forest walked through her now. Children came to learn from her, not just keepers, but weavers, engineers, singers, dancers. She taught them not to rule the world, but to hear it. One night, the deer came again. Not alone. A second deer walked beside it, and a third followed, and then a fourth, until the meadow filled with creatures of light and dusk, each from a realm lost or waiting, each carrying stories like lanterns. They bowed before Maren. Then, together, they turned and walked toward the east, where no forest yet stood. She understood. It was time. The becoming grow. On the final morning of her life, Maren stood in a bare stretch of earth, where no tree had grown, no whispers stirred, no roots reached. She pressed her hand to the soil. She did not sing. She listened, and the ground answered. A single sprout broke through, not from seed, but from story. When the keepers found her, Maren was gone, but in her place, a small tree stood, its bark silver, its leaves veined with green and gold, and surrounding it, 12 deer stood silent. They did not speak, but the forest did. The first has returned. The last has begun. Final epilogue. The forest within, and so the wild realms live on. They are no longer just places of green or glade. They are part of every story told with kindness, every silence kept with care, every song sung without needing to be heard. When a child whispers to a wind and it stirs, when a city grows, ivy not out of neglect, but as invitation, when a dream carries the scent of moss and hush of antlers and fog, the forest is there, not just around us, within us, waiting not to be found, but to be remembered.